Beautiful. So I'd like to welcome everyone to Setting Boundaries with the People We Love with the beautiful Susie Pettit. And I want to hand over to you, Susie.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be here. I love speaking and teaching on boundaries and codependency and relationships. I say it's because I came from a completely boundaryless life and childhood, and I really learned sort of how not to do it. And so I now I'm at a place where recognizing that boundaries are a part of all healthy relationships, and it's where a lot of our freedom lies. We often hear about boundaries in our life in ways that are more punitive, or like we're doing this to them, or if they're, or more protective, like if we're in toxic relationships or negative relationships, which certainly that is absolutely a time to use boundaries. And we need them in all our healthy relationships too. And I'm not speaking of this today, but I also love to speak about, and I know Silver Sirens has done work on, we also see boundaries around our wellness as we're aging. And I call those internal boundaries. So sort of, rules for how we treat ourselves, with maybe it's, an example of a rule of a boundary, an internal boundary might be that I like to move my body every day, or things like that. So it's just helpful to know that there are things that we do that help us. So I'm going to try to share my screen, hopefully successfully. Yes, I think so. Can you see like a blue boundary setting? Oh, good to hear. All right, everyone. So the things that I'm going to teach and speak about today literally have the potential to strengthen all your relationships and help you feel better in your life. It is without boundaries, we can feel a lot of stress and responsibility and heaviness, whether it's for our sort of horizontal relationships like friends or spouses or partners, or our up-down relationships, which are just our aging parents or our adult children. So no matter what, boundaries are helpful. We're going to talk about, I'm going to go through it quickly because I know some of you have watched some of my stuff in the past. We're going to talk about boundaries. We're going to talk about codependency. And the main thing I want to spend time on today is how we add drama to our lives with, with boundary setting and sort of getting in the way of our success with boundaries. As I said earlier, if you're on here live and you hear me, something I'm saying spurs something, you're like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm dealing with, jot it down. I'm hoping this will be interactive, and there'll be times I'll stop during it and then at the end again to see what's happening for you in your particular life, because that's really where we can learn about boundaries sort of in an intellectual level, and then we get to take the work and see how it applies to our life. So that's absolutely where we are. So today, as I said, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, codependency, boundaries. Emotional intelligence is something that, if we're into Silver Sirens, they actually didn't even know about until we were, well into our 20s and beyond. They started studying it in labs like in 1970 and 80, but it really never got into the common language or classroom until maybe 2010, and it's still trickling down. And so I just love pointing out what emotional intelligence is. And if you think of it in terms of intellectual intelligence, like the things that we know, maybe we know about gravity, or we know about cells, or we know about, all the stuff that we learn from books in school, I think you can understand that we're never going to learn it all. We're never going to get to a level with our intellectual intelligence where we're like, okay, I'm done. Faith, I've learned it all. Try like nothing else to learn here. Okay. Same thing goes with our emotional intelligence, that it is a spectrum, and we may be sort of on one side of the spectrum depending on how we were raised and what was sort of passed down to us in our society. And there's always room for us to become a little more emotional intelligence. It's not something I just like to say that because I find often that the people that I work with are quick to blame themselves or judge themselves and think that they are doing something wrong, and you're not. Wherever you are in the emotional intelligence spectrum is exactly where you're meant to be. And so let's talk about what emotional intelligence is. It is what it sounds like. It's having intelligence about our emotions, which I like to break it down into three things. which what an emotion is, how to feel an emotion, and where emotions come from. Emotional intelligence in itself could be an entire class in Silver Sirens. And today I'm just really quick on the first two, and the third one is what is most important. So what an emotion is this part. It's an emotion. The word is energy in motion. They literally are a physical feeling, physical energy in motion in our body. They're things we can actually feel, similar to a tummy ache or a toothache. Okay, so you heard me correctly, that feeling something like disappointment or happiness is a feeling state in our body. So think of when you last felt excited. Maybe something was coming up for you on the weekend, or you were so excited about this talk today. Okay, it can feel tingly. Part of emotional intelligence is getting intelligent about what that feeling feels like in your body. What does excitement feel like?
Susan frozen?
I'm not frozen. This is Monique on me.
Okay. Yes, Susie, you're frozen. Is everybody else okay? Jody, can you see me? Okay, so Susan, I'll give her a call.
I might be back on.
Yes.
Okay, so this was like perfect for Zoom. Of us, like, what did we just feel there? That's a great example. I felt a little panic, and panic to me almost feels like I'm having a hot flash, like a hot flash. It's like it just sort of comes over me. Okay, so my main point here is that emotional intelligence is emotions or energy in motion. And one thing again, this talk is not on emotional intelligence, but if you want to build your intelligence in this area, one thing I have people do is they start a little notebook and they literally try to learn like what the different feelings and emotions feel like in their body. It's like, what does anger feel like to me versus embarrassment, or irritation versus frustration, or sad versus happy. Okay, the reason why we do that is a lot of us, myself included in the past, run around sort of afraid to feel the feelings. And when we sort of neutralize it, where we're just like, like we don't really judge ourselves when we get a stubbed toe. We aren't like, oh my goodness, my toe is hurting too much, I shouldn't be hurting. Yet we do that with our emotions. We can get more emotional intelligent when we're like, what does this feel like to us? So that's helpful. Okay. So moving on from emotional intelligence, the part I want to focus on today is where emotions come from. And that's this second part where I have circumstance, thought, and emotion. Okay. Most of us think emotions come from the things happening outside of us, like the emotion comes from Zoom shutting down, whereas actually the emotion comes from the thought of that we think about the circumstance in our life. So the circumstance, Zoom shuts down. Okay. I have the thought, oh my gosh, this is interrupted. And I feel something close to panic. Someone else might have a thought that is like, well, that's a bother, and feel something a little more neutral. Maybe just like general irritation. Oh, it's going to take a little longer. You know, someone might have the thought that it's like, oh, well, this happens. And they feel just sort of a neutral affect. Okay. Our feelings and our emotions come from our thoughts. Most of us are taught that our feelings come from the things happening around us. But what that would mean is that everyone on this call would have the exact same feeling state about Zoom shutting down, which is not what happens. Okay. So let's say your daughter doesn't call you back. We all think that we're going to feel a certain way because our daughter doesn't call us back, or our friend, we see our friend out at a cafe with someone else, or our partner, we ask him or her a question and she doesn't respond to us. A lot of us think that that circumstance is going to make us feel a certain way. And I'm here to say, no, it is our thoughts about that thing. Okay, say your daughter doesn't call you back and you feel irritated. Are you irritated because she didn't call you back? No, you're irritated because of your thought. Okay, probably something like if you were me and my daughter doesn't call me back, I might think like, doesn't she know? Like, I'm feeling lonely. Why won't she call me back? Or I might have the thought like, what kind of daughter doesn't call her mom back after all these things I've done for her? Okay, all those thoughts are creating my feelings. This is actually really good news. Okay, which means that we're not putting our emotional state in other people's hands. Like I'm not putting my emotional state in my daughter's hands. Okay, it puts us much more in control than we think. It's our thinking about the things that are happening in our life that are making us feel how we feel. It is where all the freedom lies. Okay, so first, it helps us feel more in control. So say you notice later today your chest is feeling tight and you're feeling a little irritated. And you're like, huh, let me see. Oh, I know why. It's because I'm making up the story in my head that my daughter didn't call me back and she should have called me back. I promise you, whenever we connect our feeling with our thought, we feel a little relief. I know, many of us, if we're talking about menopause or perimenopause, sometimes we have a symptom. Like for me, I've had dry eyes. And when I have dry eyes, I'm like, what is happening? Is it the sun? Is it the shampoo I'm using? Is it this? And then when I heard from someone, they're like, oh no, that's like a symptom of perimenopause. I feel this like relief. And even though I'm like, darn it, I don't want that symptom, I can feel some ease. Same thing with our thoughts and feelings. So we're feeling irritated and we're like, why are we irritated? Is it because our daughter didn't call us back? It's like, no, it's because I'm thinking that thought. We can feel a little bit of relief. So that's just interesting to know. Okay. It's the first piece of emotional intelligence that can help us as a sort of awareness tool with ourselves, like what it's like to be Margaret or Anna or Jody or Faith in this world. It's like, all right, okay, that's what I'm feeling right now. The second way it helps us is what I'm focusing on today is where it helps us in our relationships. So when we understand that our feelings come from our thoughts, it only makes sense then that the other people in our lives, their feelings come from their thoughts. Okay, like our partner being mad. Why is he or she mad? Is it because of what we did? No, it's because of his thoughts. Okay, how about your mom being disappointed? Why is she disappointed? Because of her thoughts. How about your daughter feeling victim-y? It's because of her thoughts. Okay, this takes some learning and understanding because, again, as I said with emotional intelligence, we weren't taught this when we were younger. And I just want to see the lightness of this and how it is actually wonderful news because we have a lot less responsibility in our lives and for the feeling states of other people than we think. We influence them for sure. And yet ultimately how they feel is going to be based on their thinking. Okay. So for me, sometimes this can feel like a permission slip. I want to pause there to see if anyone has anything they want to say, or if there's anything you put in the chat about this. We're all good. Okay. So now we learn that our feelings come from our thoughts, and now we're like, well, how does that matter so much? It matters so much. It is basic, it is how our brain works, and it gives us all our power back in our lives. Is our feeling comes from our head, then what we're thinking, who is responsible for them? Us. Which brings us to something that shows up quite often, okay, which is moving on to codependency. Okay, if you think of the word co, okay, we're codependent, we're sort of mingled, we're like all enmeshed. Okay, it's actually what we don't want, unless the kid is like, we're in a relationship with someone who's 8 and under. Okay, we do not want to be enmeshed with people. We also don't want to be hyper independent. Okay, I've got it, it's fine. That's like the ice queen, you know, it's like, I'm all good here. What we're looking for is an interdependence, sort of like, it's like, you know, Susie takes care of Susie, Faith takes care of Faith, and together we're stronger. Okay, so the codependency is a fancy word for saying we feel overly responsible for someone else's feeling state or emotion, their life experience. Okay, maybe you've thought the thought like, I don't want to hurt his feelings, or I don't want him to get angry, or I don't want her to be disappointed. Okay, let's bring now what we know about emotional intelligence to our relationships. And it's like, but wait a minute, we don't even have that power, you guys. Like sirens, we can't. Like their thoughts make them feel disappointed or angry or hurt. Okay. We also want to be aware of that so we don't let them blame us for how they feel. All right. Remember emotional intelligence. They feel how they feel. Why? Because of how they're thinking. Another definition I like of codependency that I've heard is we give someone outside of us control over our emotions, which is really disempowering. Okay. Certainly, like if we're giving our adult children power over how our day is going to go, or our, you know, mom who is complaining about everything, power over our day, or our boss who's being unreasonable, or the cashier at Woolies, you know, it's like, it's not a good place to be. We want to take back over control of that, right? I need to say, don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean we don't care about how other people feel. We absolutely care about how other people feel. And this is where I like to draw the distinction between empathy, which is caring for how someone else feels. Like our partner says, I'm really angry that you were late last night for our, you know, date at the dinner restaurant. That's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I get it. Totally. Versus codependency, taking responsibility for someone else's feelings. All right, my example of the partner, I want to give another one because often real-time examples help. And my son called the other day and said, he's at University of Wollongong, and he said he's totally stressed. He started the conversation the way, like, if you're a parent, I don't like hearing this. It's like, Mom, I'm so stressed. I should just hang up. I don't, because I want to be empathetic. But he's like, Mom, I'm so stressed. I'm so confused. I don't know if I have the right major, you know, I'm thinking like he's doing finances now, and he's thinking maybe he wants to do science, and he's all like, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Here's the difference between empathy and codependency. Empathy is me saying, oh, gee, like that sounds really hard. Tell me more. Okay. Tell me more is magical with empathy. Whether you're talking to, it doesn't matter who, whether you're talking to a kid, a friend, you know, it's like, tell me more. That's empathy. Tell me what it's like to be you. I want to hear more. Codependency looks like me taking his emotion. It's like he calls on the phone, he says I'm stressed, and I'm almost like taking the stress and like putting it on me. I'm like, oh, and then I jump in to fix it. Like I get stressed about his stress. And I'm like, well, okay, well, why don't you try a biology class? That might be a good idea. Or like, you know, I just like take it on, I try to fix it. Or maybe I say something unhelpful. I sort of like, I hear him saying he's stressed, and I try to talk him out of it. I'm like, oh, you're fine. Everyone feels that way sometimes. Like, let's get that's both of those. I'm like, I've done all of it. There's no shame here. But can you see the difference? Empathy is like, I have this sign behind me actually with the whole emotional intelligence. Empathy is letting him have the feeling he's having. he might be thinking thoughts that I don't agree with. He actually said, he's like, I wasted all my time here already. That's not a thought I want him to think, but I'm not fighting with him over how he's thinking. I'm empathetic. I'm saying like, wow, that's really hard. Tell me more. And I'm not trying to fix him. I'm not saying like, well, do this, then you'll feel different or whatever. Another example that maybe happens to you is, say your older mother calls, okay? And she often calls, and you've been working, you're like, you know what? I just noticed that after I talk to my mom, I feel really like drained and depleted because like she spends a lot of time telling me how lonely she is. Okay. And so then your mom calls, you don't answer, you get the answering machine, or maybe she does call and you do answer. I have to come up with a better, it's like not happening live time. Let's say you answer. Okay. So she calls and she says to you, she says, I'm so upset you didn't answer my call yesterday. I felt so lonely. I could barely get out of bed. Empathy looks like you saying, oh, wow, mom, that sounds hard. I hate it when I feel like that. That's empathy. She's telling you her emotional experience. You're not taking her emotions as like, oh, okay, let me fix them. You're just like, oh, wow, mom, that sounds hard. I'm so sorry. I don't like it when I feel like that. Codependency is you taking responsibility for that. She's trying to give you responsibility. Please note, she's saying the circumstances, you didn't answer the call, and she's saying that made me lonely. That is inaccurate. It is her thoughts that made her lonely. Okay, she could have the thought, well, my daughter didn't answer her call, now what? And feel a little energized. Okay, what are my other options? Or she could have the thought, gee, what kind of daughter doesn't answer her mom's call? Now I'm all alone, I have nothing to do today, and feel lonely. So it's her thought. So codependency would look like you playing along in that nasty drama train and taking responsibility for her feelings. And maybe you make excuses. You're like, I had a lot going on, mom. I was doing, X, Y, Z. Or you get defensive and you're like, gee, mom, I can't be responsible for keeping you entertained every day. Neither of those are relationship building, right? Very different feeling in the relationship. Your mom shares how she's feeling. You're empathetic. Okay, that feels more like love. Versus you taking it on. Wow, that stinks, mom. I don't like feeling lonely. Okay, love is not about taking responsibility for her independence and agency and thinking you need to solve her loneliness. You can have empathy for her and sort of faith in her, like, okay, she'll figure this out. She's got it. Once she stops blaming me for how she feels, maybe she'll get out there and, try the new bridge club at her community center. I am the first to tell you that this is hard, yet what experts like me know is this next slide I'm showing you, is that the path to more connected, mature relationships is empathy, not codependency. Because when we take responsibility for their feelings, it leads to this dynamic that I show here of over-functioning, okay, and the other person under-functioning. So when we're over-functioning, so say your mom calls and she's like, you didn't answer my call and I was so lonely, I could barely get out of my bed, and you take it on and then you over-function. And you're like, okay, mom, and then you're just like, screw it. I'm going to answer the call every time she calls. I can't have that. You know how you're going to feel eventually? You're going to start to feel resentment. You're like, God, I have to answer, you're like out with your friends and your mom calls. You're like, I have to take this. My mom can't function without me. So you're then feeling resentment. Certainly in a role of caregiver, you're going to pretty quickly be feeling burnt out. Okay. The other person is then in this under functioning, which we call learned helplessness also. Because if your mom calls and says, you made me lonely, and we buy that story, then they truly believe you made them lonely, and they're not in their brain looking for solutions. And it feels really awful. I put victim and villain in that slide because I don't think any of us ever really want to feel like a victim or a villain. Okay. But when we're in this dynamic, our loved ones can feel victimy when they make us the villain. It's not helpful. When they're like, oh, Susie's the villain, like Susie's the bad person because she didn't answer my call. That feels awful. But then we also, as the overfunctioner, can feel victimy. We're like, God, it's all on me to keep my mom so she doesn't feel feeling in her body. And we can feel this victim villain. Okay. Woe is me. So that's not so much fun. So I do want to stop here because that's a big thing. I want to see if any of you guys have any questions, if this is coming up in your life somewhere where you want support with, or examples, or anything. You can wave at me, or I can just continue and go on. But if you have a dynamic where you are noticing that you're sort of being codependent, not empathetic, and you just want some more tools around that, let me know. Or if you're just like, no, I think I am responsible for other people's feeling states. You know. Also, as you continue to listen, if you have a specific, it's always helpful when we have a specific example where it's like, yeah, yesterday, you know, my adult daughter called and said she didn't have enough money for groceries because of me, you know, and to sort of play out like, okay, well, like what happened there? Let's talk about that, where things can happen.
It's not a question, but I just wanted to add, I really loved when you said about that over functioning and the under functioning dynamic that happens. Because I know that a lot of people, the people pleasers, that idea of, I don't want to say no to the people that I love, but to me, it's kind of disempowering them when we overdo for them. You know, that I think for me is that I'm making an assumption that they don't have the capacity to do it. And I think that's not a very empowering message. So I really, really liked that.
Yeah. And we make that assumption they don't have the capacity to do that, but then we sort of make that, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They don't. Because if our mom calls and says, I'm so lonely, and we take that on and we're like, oh, it's our responsibility, versus being like, yeah, mom, I get it. I'm sorry. Like, what are you going to do next time that happens? She then is in her problem solving mode. What she's doing is sort of getting back into this more childlike place where she's using your brain to solve.
Yeah.
It's this like, you know.
There's a few things in the okay, there's a few things in the chat. Do they any questions or it's just comments?
Yeah, the gray area of codependency, living with aged parents. And it is this villain, victim. It's also helpful. Like, this is why I love working with people like the Silver Sirens, because it's super helpful for us to not judge ourselves if we're in this place. We want to just be aware and have some like kindness. Kind awareness is how we start to change anything. Okay. I actually have a little, since you can see me, I always have it pretty close. When we're trying, it would help if I had it right side up. When we're trying to make change in our life, the first thing we want to do is we have to see it. We have to have a heart awareness, kind awareness, not just awareness that's like, oh yeah, I'm doing this, I suck. That isn't helpful. That's not kind. But a kind awareness of like, oh my gosh, I am stuck in that victim villain role with my mom and dad. Oh, that's so interesting. Or, oh, I do race in to give advice when I'm not asked for it. Okay, that's the first step. Then our second step is we make a plan. We're like, okay, next time, what am I going to do? And that's some of what I help with in groups. And, you know, and then we take action, messy action. Looks messy at first. Your mom calls and says, I'm so lonely. And we're like, okay, I'm going to try this. And we just messy, have words come out of our mouth. I'm sorry, mom, what are you going to do?
So we've got Maddie's got a hand
Maddie,
up.
let's see.
Oh, hi. Yes, you might have already sort of answered the question, but I'm thinking about the reverse. So if someone like my experience had been, I would be devastated if you leave me. So I think I tend to feel that then, and I suppose then it's sort of taking on too much responsibility in terms
You're
of
saying you would be devastated, or they're saying
they're saying they would be devastated. So I'm thinking that that's sort of a reverse in a way, that then I think, oh, I really must take responsibility and make sure that I never do this.
Right. I mean, it's both. You're doing both. Because them saying, I would be devastated if I left you, we know you leaving them, they get to have thoughts about. So it's their thoughts that are making them feel devastated. Now, I have never spent much time with you, but one thing I might say is like, yeah, that makes sense. Like someone saying to me that they'd be devastated if I left, it's like, all right, I totally get it. Like I don't know what the dynamics are. Sorry.
Yes, but it's quite manipulative, really.
Oh, it is manipulative. That's
Yeah.
why I don't take that on. Like, it's not my then responsibility to stay so you're not devastated. First of all, like, if you're Maddie is this marvelous Maddie, it's like, great. And it's like, yeah, I get that you'd be devastated. And it's not like, not my job. If I want to leave, why do I want to leave? Usually we don't want to leave situations that are amazing and life-filling for us. So it's like, if you're choosing to leave, your needs matter. This is where it gets back to faith and the people pleasing that she was saying. Sometimes we feel like we don't want someone to be devastated, or we don't want someone to have a hard emotion, or we don't want someone to feel discomfort. And then yet we're the ones that feel it. We're like, oh, don't want that person to be devastated, so I'll just stay over here living in this subpar situation. Or I don't want them to feel upset with with me saying no, so I'll say yes, and then I'll be upset with myself.
Yeah, and then it's sort of like an ongoing, or feeling really drained, I think,
Yes.
or exhausted in that type of relationship.
Yeah, because you're like and that's where we sometimes can feel victimy, because we're just like, oh, I can't leave because he or she would feel devastated. And
True,
then we're like giving them all the power. It's like, okay, no, like
Yes,
if it is
exactly.
like, yeah, if it's these relationships where it's, spouse or partner or same adult children are still are like, once they're over the age of like 22, we want them to be more independent too. So we're no longer in that like responsibility frame. If we're in that, then there is a part of interdependence of Maddie doing Maddie and this other person taking care of them, and then together you're stronger. It's like, okay, they might be devastated, but are we looking as a whole of, if we're talking about a relationship between the two of you, is a relationship. If the relationship is not something that is giving, like lighting Maddie up and bringing her that life-filling joy that we want to feel at Silver Sirens, which is why we're here, then that's something to be addressed. If this person who says they're going to feel devastated is going to work on it, great. Change doesn't happen every night. Let's go for it. But if they're just like, no, I'm just going to keep being me and just manipulate you and tell you how devastated I'm going to be, it's like, well, it looks like you're going to be feeling some devastation in your future. And that is when it is paramount that you get support from people. Like, I offer support. I low cost monthly membership, because your brain is going to be telling you you're doing something wrong, because we were raised before emotional intelligence. And we were raised at a time where codependency was absolutely modeled, where it's like, your mom is lonely, you better go over and call her. That's something that all of us can that's why I love having groups like this. We can be aware of what our other, siren sisters are going through, and to just watch our language. Like, sometimes I've heard people be like, but she's your mother, or, but you've been married for X amount of years, or, but what would he do without you? None of that is helpful. All of that is sort of codependent thinking. Okay. In that situation, just tell me more. Tell me what's going on.
Thank you. That was
Yeah.
really helpful.
No, I love it. I'm going to go back to, because this is where the boundary work comes in for sure. And so this overfunctioning, like that screen in itself that I have there, maybe take a screenshot of that, because we don't want to be in any part of that. Okay. This learned helplessness that it's like, or the resentment burnout feeling. And then boundaries are how we get past this and how we learn about it. A boundary is a guideline for how we want to be treated. A simple way I like to think about it is almost like it's a little instruction book. Like if you go to Kmart and you get a little instruction book to how to work your new diffuser, okay? That's what a boundary is like. It is a guideline, oops, let me go to my next slide. A guideline for how you expect to be treated in your relationships, okay? Not all boundaries need to be said out loud. You actually don't need to explain your boundaries. And other people do not need to agree or understand your boundaries. Those are all really difficult, and I could do like a whole, half-year course in all of them. Okay, and yet, if you could just take away that a boundary is something you have the right to do. Sometimes what I have my people work on is I have them literally, because we are not used to this as women raised in this society. I have us write out what would be our instruction book. Like, what would it, like, what would a manual of you be like? Like, what would it look like if someone was reading the manual on Maddie or the manual on Jody or the manual on Margaret? Manual on Susie is going to say, I don't allow people to yell at me. I don't allow strangers to touch private parts of my body. I don't allow people to, I don't enjoy people stopping by unannounced. Okay? I don't answer phone calls after 7 p.m. would be, you know, it's sort of like just getting into that thinking space of like, what do I like? Often we don't know, because as Faith said, we spend our whole life pleasing other people that we're like, who the heck am I? I don't know what would be in my little manual book. That's a really neat thing to look at. And then you play around with them. You know, it's like Susie says she doesn't like answering the phone after 7. It's like, I don't like answering the phone before 7. You know, it's like there's no right or wrong. Another thing I have manuals about are my emails. I don't check my work email on the weekends. I don't check my personal email during the week, you know, whatever. Like, it's just giving yourself a permission slip today to make the manual for you. What does your instruction book look like? You are an amazing, unique person here, and you have your own instruction manual. So what is it? Okay, and getting a little more clear about that, because then sometimes when we can feel frustrated or irritated, it's usually because a boundary has been crossed. Okay, and sometimes we allow the boundaries to be crossed because we haven't stopped and been like, do I allow them? Like a boundary I had, and I have made in later years, because as I said at the beginning, I didn't used to have boundaries, is I was like, you know what? I'm not okay with people yelling at me. My ex-husband used to yell at me a lot. And one day I was like, how is this okay? Like if I was at Woolies, I wouldn't allow them to yell at me. You know, the produce guy to be like, you took the wrong lettuce. And here I am, like letting this man yell at me. So I just said that, you know, I was like, you know what? I don't allow people to yell at me. If you're going to keep yelling, I'm going to leave the room. That is a wonderful, healthy boundary. And what I want you to see is a boundary is telling people how you'll be treated. Okay. They can keep being them. So my ex can and did keep yelling. And so it looks like, hey, I don't allow people to yell at me. I'm going to leave the room. And we lived together at the time before he was, so I would go in the bathroom and close the door and just feel all sorts of nasty because I wasn't used to speaking up for myself. Okay. So some of these boundaries, like it's just this sort of like, what is our instruction manual? Okay. They are not something we do to someone else. I'm not telling my husband, my ex-husband, that he could yell at me. I'm not telling him he's bad for yelling at me. Okay. Similar to like, I just have the boundary for myself that I don't answer the phone. I don't look at my cell after 8 p.m. or something. I'm not like, if someone texts me after 8 p.m., I don't call them up and be like, how dare you? Like they text away. I get to decide whether I look at it or not until the next morning. Okay. So a boundary isn't something you do to someone. That sometimes holds us back from setting boundaries because we feel like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't, like I'm doing something wrong. It sort of gets into that people pleasing again. They have that like, oh, you know, they asked me to make all the cupcakes for the, you know, the Rotary Club and I need to say yes. It's like, no, actually, I don't bake. It's the boundary. Yes. Okay. We're nearing the end of our time, I think, which is wonderful. Okay. So one of the things I want to move to the things before I go to this slide, the things that get us in the way of setting boundaries. We have 3 assumptions that we make. All 3 of them are harmful to our boundary setting. So when I say assumption, I think of that ass you make of me. Okay. These are things that are actually not correct. So the first boundary problem we get into is this actually stops us often before we even start boundaries, is this assumption that we think people think like us. And so what that might sound like in your head is they should just know. Okay, they should just know not to call at 7 a.m. on a Sunday. Or they should just know not to ask me to do that volunteer thing because I'll have to say yes. Okay, they don't. People don't think like us. If they knew, they wouldn't be asking you. Okay, we might, another way this is like we might say, like, if I were them, I'd do this. It feels almost like our brain is having like a computer error or something. Okay, or why are they saying something like that? I'd never say that. Like, right, because they're not you. They don't think like us. We make the assumption that they will react based on how we would react if we were in their shoes and they're not in our shoes. Okay, so this sometimes, like even like the example I've been going back to time and time again with the mother calling you and, you know, she blaming you for her loneliness. I might think, I would never do that to my kids. Why is my mom doing this? Not helpful. We still can say, hey, mom, you know what? Like, I'm just going to talk to you every other week, every other day, or every other week. It doesn't, you know, whatever the guideline is for you. So this assumption that other people think like us and thus should know how to act gets us into a lot of frustrated or irritated thinking. So this is where our emotional intelligence and getting clear of what frustration and irritation feels like to us is super helpful. Okay, for me, frustration feels really tight in my chest. And when I feel it, I'm like, oh, hold on. I think I need to set a boundary. Okay, why? What's happening? I'm thinking they should just do the right thing. I'm like, yeah, but if I opened my mouth, they think differently than me. So this is really helpful for us to notice two emotions that come up often when we have an opportunity to set a boundary are frustrated and irritated. So when I feel frustrated and irritated, I have like a little, you know, it's almost like a little, like I'm driving in my car and a light goes off of my dashboard. I'm like, oh, you need a boundary, Susie. Have you stated your boundary? Okay, remember, not everyone thinks like me. Get started. All right, so maybe, you know, I was somewhere recently and someone commented on my weight and they were like, oh, you look much thinner on videos. And my thought was like, who says that? Okay. And the next time I saw this woman again, that was like 6 months ago. And I saw her like 2 months ago. And she said, you look much, you know, oh, there you are again. I keep forgetting how heavy you are. Okay. Meanwhile, I'm like, interesting. And I said to her this time, I had preparation and I was like, please don't comment about my weight. Like, not okay to talk about my weight. Okay. And then she just gets to move on. It's like, stop. You know, that's another area where we might say like, hey, please stop commenting on my kid's gender choice. Or I don't need any more comments on my physical appearance. Please call before you come over. These are all boundaries. These are guidelines for how we want to be treated. I don't need anyone commenting about my weight. Like it's all subjective or about my hair color choice or about my eyelash length, but they don't know that. They might think that's perfectly acceptable. And this boundary assumption we get into that causes us trouble is we think we're like, I would never say that to someone. And so then we don't, and it's like, right, but she did. So let's speak up. The second boundary pitfall is to assume that they will understand our boundary and ultimately agree with it. Okay. This is a hard one. We want them to understand and agree so bad, right? Like, say we have a boundary with our mom that we're like, we're going to call you every other day instead of every day. I have a full life. I have lots going on. You know, we don't, whatever. We follow Susie's boundary plan. You say that to your mom, and it would be so nice if your mom is like, oh, okay, Susie, come on. All right. This is the assumption we make. We have this, we like sort of step into like fairyland Disney brain thinking, imagining our mom will be like, oh, okay, that's a great idea, Susie. Good job. You know, that's reasonable. If I keep calling you and complaining about how lonely I am, I guess I'll never take care of the problem. I guess I need to get out and, you know, figure out how to be less lonely. Thanks, Susie. It's like anyone else rolling on the floor laughing. Like that doesn't happen. But that's the assumption we make. Like we want them to understand. All right. And they're not going to. What I find here happens with some of us sirens or some of the women I work with is we over explain. So if you find yourself just like, you know, so I'm not going to answer phone calls after 8 or whatever it is. Like I don't allow people to yell at me anymore. We get into this explanation. It's like, it's almost like verbal vomiting. Okay. And I just try to notice with myself, okay, we go back to this, like, you know, loving awareness. I'm like, oh, look at, you're doing that thing, Susie, you're over talking, you're over explaining, and then I have a plan where for me, I'm just like, and you're just going to close your mouth. Just close that mouth, breathe, take messy action. Okay. So it's just like you say the boundary and we just close the mouth. All right.
I know you have to finish off, but just getting close.
Yep, 10 more minutes. So the third boundary, we've got it. I'll just go through this one and then we'll open it up for questions. The third boundary pitfall, and I want you to really hear this, is we think that if we say it once, that's like, what do I have written here? Thinking you will only need to tell them once. Okay, so you tell your mom, I'm going to call you every other day. And then she calls you on, she keeps calling every day. Okay, and then you pick up the phone and she's like, why didn't you answer yesterday? Yeah, it's not going to happen. I like adjusting my expectations, and with boundaries, I like thinking like I'm going to need to tell them 10 times. Like with my ex, when I first told him, well, that was a good one. I first told him I don't allow people to yell at me anymore. He was like, that's weird, because I've been married to a woman for 19 years who let her people yell at her. And now suddenly, I don't think he ever learned the lesson. In fact, I imagine if I called him up right now, he'd yell at me. So it's some people are not going to get it. That doesn't mean you stop saying it. Okay. You actually get really good at laying the boundary. You're like, hey, remember, if you keep yelling at me, I'm going to leave the room. If you keep yelling, I'm going to hang up the phone. Okay, but this one where it's like, just go into it. It's going to feel very uncomfortable to your nervous system when you first say the thing. Okay, when you first speak up for yourself. That's where it's super helpful to have support from, this is where I say the two main things you need when you're setting boundaries. You need support of people who are not drinking the codependency Kool-Aid. Okay, so they're not all like, yes, you are responsible for other people's feelings. You do need to say what other people want you to do. So we need support. Okay, and we need to put on our student hats again and learn. You guys are doing that part of it right here. You're learning. You're like, what do I need to do? You'll have this recording, watch it over. What are some things you can do? I have a podcast where I have lots of episodes on there and boundaries. If you reach out to my email, I might even have it written somewhere. Yes, there it is. Susie at SMB Well. I can send you free podcasts that you can listen to. Okay. I have a group. I run a Love Your Life school because I wanted to put together like a place, because I was like, why were we not taught this? I was taught how to find the volume of a parallelogram. When am I ever asked that? Never. But I need boundaries every freaking day. I need to learn how to do conflict. I need to learn, and I'm just like, great. So I put together the Love Your Life school, I call it, where you can join. And actually, if you're an Aussie, make sure you text me, because I have a special code. So you get, I think it's $48 US a month, but I have an Aussie code so you can make it more closer to your $48. But that's every month we get on there. We have live coaching. So you bring your thing. You're like, oh my God, my guy said that he's going to be devastated again. What do I do? That's where we take the messy action. I also have classes in there and boundaries, all sorts of support. But ultimately, that's, I have lots of free resources for you. So make sure that you do learn things. I also want to get back here with the support. When we are doing these things, however old you are, think of your brain. You've seen a picture of the brain and all the little grooves in there. Okay. However old you are, those grooves are that age deep. So I'm 52. So I have some deep freaking grooves in there. And what that means is when someone asks me to do something, my brain is like, yes, do it. Be a people pleaser. And when I'm creating new pathways, which is really good for our aging brain, by the way, I'm trying things differently. It's going to feel like I'm in the Wild West. It's going to feel like I'm like, oh my gosh. And having someone there to be like, it's okay. I get it. You said that. Totally fine. We don't want the person that's like, oh, but that's your mom. That's unhelpful. That keeps us stuck in our old patterns. That keeps us people pleasing. That keeps us feeling that victim, villain, learned helplessness, all that angst. Yes, I think we have like 5 minutes left if anyone has anything coming up for them or.
I can see some people scribbling away. Anyone got, literally only have 5 minutes because we do have to jump off pretty much on time.
Yeah.
So anyone's got urging, burning desire? I will be sharing the video with everyone again.
Good.
And also,
Okay, I did want to ask something.
Yes, Anne.
So you earlier said there's two things you can do. There's kindness awareness is how to change things, and to make a plan how to come face to face with it the next time you do.
Mhm.
So is that the way to break the victim villain mentality?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first part is just awareness, and it's like, oh, wow, I'm sort of stuck in that. And that looks like, so you might already be having the awareness today. It's
Yeah.
almost like you're sort of like going through life, and then something happens, like you might, listen to a coach online, and then you see things differently. So it's like a flashlight is turned on in like a room that had
Okay.
been dark before. So you have, what we want, I think, for you to emphasize in your brain right now is the kind awareness, kindness to
Yeah.
yourself and to them. It's like there are two parts.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I
like
got it.
they aren't trying. It's almost this, like, if you're the overfunctioner and they're the underfunctioner, feels really good for them to be like, they may not deliberately be doing this. That might be something they've done. Also, for us, I've been an overfunctioner many times. I
Yes,
get
same
something
here.
from that too. I can feel important. I can feel sort of righteous. I can feel like, so it's that like kind awareness. It's like, okay, we are here now and we want it to
Okay.
be different. And so then we come up with a plan. And what I would just say is to, reach out to me or get support from someone, because we want you to start small with maybe something like, if you look, are you the one that said that? Yeah, you
The
live with your
aging
aged
parents.
So I would just look at something small that happens routinely that bothers you, but isn't like, okay, guys, now you're moving out, or, but it more like something that you're like, what could they do that feels like a burden to me? Like, where are you
Okay.
feeling most burdened or burnt out or victim-y in your life? Ask yourself that and give yourself like 2 minutes to just brainstorm. Okay.
Okay.
And then you pick something really small. We're just like, it's filling up their water jug at night. They can do that. I don't know why I'm still doing that for them. This is ridiculous. Like they'll be fine.
Mm.
That's your plan. And the part I don't want you to miss is then we take messy action. Okay. So we
Awareness.
take the action.
Mm.
It looks messy at first. Maybe you say something out of your mouth. They, and then what we do is we're like, oh, okay, how am I going to do that? I have 10 more times to say this thing. How do I do that differently the second time? We learn from our messy action. You just get started. It doesn't have to look perfect.
Thank you.
We get
Thank
feedback.
you.
Just get
Thank
started.
you. There's time for another quick one. Do one more quick one. Okay, if there isn't another quick one. Susan, were you going to you look like you were just about to put your hand up. Susan, no?
No.
Okay. I'm trying to read your mind. Okay, let's go over to you, Susie. Maybe just some few last words.
Yeah,
What
I
takeaway?
really want to give you all encouragement to do this work. What I find is that most of the drama in our lives comes from codependent thinking and or lack of boundaries. And it's like we are like fish swimming in a polluted fishbowl. So we don't even realize that it's going on, because we're like, like what Faith said, like you don't want to say no to people you love. And if we talk to a girlfriend and she's like, yeah, you don't want to, it's like we're just all reinforcing that. And so really the more you try to like get out of that polluted water, and maybe it's just little steps at first. It's like, you know what? Susie has this podcast, the Love Your Life Show. Actually, I should put that in here. It's free. It comes out every Wednesday. Like you just go through, past episodes of that. And you just are like, you know what? I'm going to start listening every Wednesday. I'm going to start bathing my brain in something a little different. Of course, this isn't working. And you just start small. You don't have to do everything overnight. If you notice that you feel overwhelmed, a little reminder that that's because of your thoughts. And usually thoughts that are making us feel overwhelmed is there's so much to do with this relationship's too far gone. And it's like, just like take a breath and be like, you know what? Susie says there's always something small I could do. What's something small I could do? Let's just take this back. Maybe it's just taking a breath. Maybe it's taking, I have a fun quiz too that's free. I'll put it, it's how codependent are you? That's that second link there. It's just 10 quick questions that are sort of fun. I got 10 out of 10 the first time. That's why I do this work, because I have been completely codependent. So, and I notice it's like codependency is not a thing that you're like, click, I'm done, no longer codependent. It's so in us. It's like our little cells in our body. So I notice sometimes I'm more codependent than others. Again, it's kind awareness with ourselves. So that would be the one thing I would leave you with. To do this kindly to yourself, support your sister sirens, and keep doing the work and learning. Because it does matter. You matter. Your experience matters. You are not here to just be living some subpar life because it makes everyone else happy. It's not why we're here.
Thank you so much, Susie. Thank
Yay,
you.
thank you all. I'm so glad. I
Yay,
love
that's
talking to
fantastic. And I
people.
think you're right. The key is consistency and gentleness, you know,
Gentle.
not beating ourselves up.
Mhm.
And I always say it takes a while for us to learn these behaviors. It's going to take a while for us to unlearn them.
Mhm.
And for the
Yeah.
people around us to learn that we've got a new rules of engagement, you know?
Yes.
So it takes a while for everyone. So it's like being super gentle in that transition. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Look at you guys being the type of people that come to this kind of thing. Awesome.
Thank you.